Welcome back to Passport to Possibility, presented by J.H. Marlin. If you watched our Why I Moved to the Cayman Islands to Work in Law episode, you'll know Cayman can be an incredible place to live and work, world-class beaches, a strong financial sector, and no personal income tax. In separate videos, we've also taken you deep into the St Kitts Nevis Citizenship by Investment program and for 2026 reforms. Today, we're bringing those threads together. We're comparing something we hear all the time. I'll just be an expat in Cayman forever, with a very different approach, acquiring a permanent citizenship in St Kitts and Nevis. If you'd like to stay on top of these kinds of strategic comparisons, don't forget to subscribe so you get our future updates on citizenship by investment, residency, and descent. Let's get into it. Jennifer, let's start with Cayman. In your Cayman lifestyle video, you talked about why people are so drawn there. When someone says they're moving to Cayman for tax or lifestyle reasons, what does Cayman actually offer most expats in terms of status?
For the majority of expat, Cayman offers different forms of residency and permission to live and work rather than immediate second citizenship. That can include work permits, residency by independent means or investment, and for a smaller group, permanent residency with the right to work. And access to full Caymanian status and British Overseas Territory citizenship is limited. It's points-based and usually takes many years of residence, plus satisfying quite strict criteria. It's not automatic, and many expats never reach that stage of getting citizenship. So in practice, what most people hold is a revocable immigration status, a right to be there under certain conditions, rather than a guaranteed inheritable second passport.
So in plain terms, Cayman usually means you're allowed to stay here under certain rules, and not you and your children have a new citizenship for life. It's immigration status, not a second nationality. Okay. On the surface, that sounds fine. Sun, safety, and residency. Why can relying on that kind of setup or permanent residency status be a problem if someone wants a long-term solution?
Because your position is still exposed to changes you don't control. Policy can change, point systems can be tightened, economic tests can shift, and the jurisdiction's needs in the labor market can evolve. And if your right to be there depends on a job, a specific investment, or maintaining certain criteria, your long-term security isn't fully in your hands. And from a planning perspective, you're still dependent on one government's future decisions. So that can work well for a period of your life, but it's very different from holding a true citizenship that isn't contingent on ongoing tests, renewals, or points, and especially if you're thinking in terms of generational planning.
Right, so the risk is that everything looks stable until rules change or your circumstances change. And then you discover your plan B was still a permission, not a permanent right. Now let's contrast that with St Kitts and Nevis. In our 2026 St Kitts series, we've walked through the program itself, but at a high level. When someone acquires St Kitts citizenship by investment, what are they actually getting?
With St Kitts and Nevis, you're acquiring full citizenship and a passport, not just a residence permit. So once you're approved and naturalized, that citizenship is not dependent on maintaining a certain salary, renewing a visa, or passing periodic points tests. It's a permanent legal status that under the law can be passed to future generations. And you can also gain the right to live in St Kitts and Nevis and to make use of the country's tax regime. For individuals, that generally means there's no personal income tax, and no wealth, gift, or inheritance tax. And when you structure things properly, that can be a genuine long-term base rather than a temporary fix that depends on the next policy announcement.
Right, so St Kitts isn't just somewhere you're allowed to stay, it's a full new home country and a tax base with a passport you can hand down, not a status you have to keep re-earning. In our St Kitts update videos, we've also talked about the program evolving. Can you explain what's happening here in 2026 and why it matters for timing?
So St Kitts and Nevis has made it clear that it's moving toward a more residency-based, genuine link model of citizenship by investment. So that means more emphasis on physical presence, deeper ties to the country, and stronger due diligence. And as part of that evolution, the simple contribution stock options, where you qualify mainly by making a donation or a public benefit contribution, are being reshaped or gradually phased out. So for clients, that means the easiest window, the period in which you can still acquire citizenship under today's relatively straightforward framework, is narrowing. So if you prefer the current model, waiting to see what happens can mean facing higher thresholds, more mandatory time on the ground, or different investment structures. So the upside is that these reforms are designed to strengthen the long-term credibility and durability of the programs, which ultimately protects existing and future citizens.
So the takeaway is that timing actually matters here. The move to residency and genuine link is positive for reputation, but if the donation-only route is what appeals to you, it's something to look at under the current rules, not postpone indefinitely. 2026 is likely the final chance to benefit from the donation method before it vanishes for good. From a tax and freedom of movement perspective, how would you compare being an expat or resident in Cayman with being a citizen of St Kitts and Nevis?
In both places, individuals can benefit from low or zero personal income tax, but the foundation underneath it is quite different. In Cayman, many expats are effectively there at the pleasure of the immigration system. Their presence depends on permits, points, or specific economic roles, and those frameworks can be adjusted over time. And as a citizen of St Kitts and Nevis, your relationship with the country is fundamentally different. You are legally tied to the part of the country. Your rights are grounded in citizenship rather than a conditional permit. And if you become a tax resident there and organize your affairs properly, you can align lifestyle, business, and tax planning around a status that is durable and inheritable. So you can also use that citizenship alongside others as part of what we often call a sovereignty stack. So you're not dependent on any single jurisdiction.
So both can be tax friendly on paper, but in Cayman, you're essentially on a very comfortable guest pass. Whereas in St Kitts, you become one of the owners of the house with rights that are much harder to unwind. Now, given all that, who do you think should look seriously at St Kitts as an alternative or complement to Cayman-style residency?
Anyone whose entire Plan B currently rests in one expat status in one country should at least explore adding a true second citizenship. So that includes people in Cayman, but also expats in other international hubs who still only hold one passport or only hold revocable residence permits. It's particularly relevant for entrepreneurs, internationally mobile professionals, and families who are thinking in generational terms. If you care about tax efficiency, but also about having a robust legal home, if something changes in your main or expat country, then a citizenship like St. Kitts and Nevis can be a cornerstone in a multi-country strategy rather than an optional extra.
Right, if your whole backup plan is basically, I just stay a resident here for forever, you're exactly the kind of person who should be looking at upgrading that to at least one real second citizenship. Okay. For someone watching who's currently relying on an expat or permanent residency status, whether that's Cayman or elsewhere similar, what does working with you to build a more permanent sovereignty stack actually look like?
We start by mapping where you are today, your current passports, any residences, where you live and work, your business and asset structure, and your family situation. Then we look at the risks and limits attached to each of those statuses and identify realistic options for adding one or more citizenships, whether that's St. Kitts and Nevis or Grenada or others, as well as any ancestry roots you might have in Europe or elsewhere. From there, we design a sequence, which citizenship or residency to pursue first, how to handle tax residency transitions, and how to integrate everything so you're compliant but less exposed to single country risk. So the goal is to move you from relying on one expat card to having layered structure, multiple jurisdiction, multiple rights that you and your children can rely on over the long term.
So you're taking people from I live in one place on sufferance to I have several durable bases and a clear sequence to get there, with St. Kitts often being one of the key building blocks rather than a standalone fix. This has been Passport to Possibility. where we unpack real-world options for global mobility and long-term freedom. If you're currently relying on expat status in a place like Cayman, and you'd like to explore upgrading that to a long-term citizenship-based solution such as St Kitts Nevis, you'll find Jennifer's contact details in the description. For a deeper dive into the lifestyle side of Cayman, watch our Why I Moved to Cayman Islands to Work in Law video, and for the nuts and bolts of the St Kitts program itself, including the 2026 changes, see our dedicated St Kitts Citizenship by Investment series. We'll have more Passport to Possibility episodes comparing different routes and looking at how to build a proper sovereignty stack. So if you'd like to see those as soon as they're out, make sure you're subscribed. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next Passport to Possibility. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you, Kevin.